distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and valued partners. It's really an honor to welcome you to the launch of this book, reviewing the form and substance of the 2021 elections.
When later, the then EU ambassador described the election day as peaceful, I could not agree. It was calm, yes, but not peaceful. An exodus out of Kampala just happened a few days before. Anxiety was felt in the air. It was exactly then when Dr. Susie reached out, suggesting this project and the work on the book that we are launching today. I immediately agreed to take on this project because I strongly believe that we needed to capture that moment.
It's taken a while since the book was finished, before this actual launch. But nonetheless, I think it is timely publication because it's a product of rigorous scholarship and thoughtful analysis by a distinguished group of academics, policymakers, and civil society actors.
Let me congratulate Susie and the entire team for this monumental work. What you have done through this is similar to what the musicians did in response to the hunger in Ethiopia, the Band Aid, and they composed the song, We Are the World. Among the laws that I worked on first when I became Minister of Justice is a law to make compulsory electronic voting. I thought that if we have electronic voting, and the technical people at the ministry agree with me, we must ensure that the ballots counted tally with the record in the machine. My law has not yet seen the light of day, so I hope you'll allow me to mobilize you to join me in calling for making electronic voting compulsory, the way it is in India.
It's a culture in Makerere to start with the anthems, and we don't want to break that culture. So may I request all of you to stand up, and then we can have the anthems. So since we have the guild president, nobody leads the university anthem other than the guild president.
I hope the anthems you're meaning are the ones I am actually going to lead. Makerere, Makerere, Ra, Cha, A. Makerere, Makerere, we build for the future, the great Makerere, great, great and mighty, the walls around thee. Great, great and mighty, the gates beside thee. O Uganda, may God uphold thee. We lay our future in thy hand. United, free, for liberty together will always stand. Honorable Minister, I hope it's okay that we do one stanza.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kindly resume your seats. So at this material time, without wasting any time, may I invite Dr. Susie Mwanga to give her opening remarks.
Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and valued partners. It's really an honor to welcome you to the launch of this book, reviewing the form and substance of the 2021 elections. It's taken a while since the book was finished, before this actual launch. But nonetheless, I think it is timely publication because it's a product of rigorous scholarship and thoughtful analysis by a distinguished group of academics, policymakers, and civil society actors. Their insights offer an invaluable lens through which to examine Uganda's electoral landscape and democratic trajectory. The 2021 elections seems like a long time ago, but when you listen to our panelists, it will be like it was yesterday. The elections were a defining moment in Uganda's political history. It was marked by unprecedented challenges, shifting political dynamics, and critical institutional responses. This book delves into these complexities, offering comprehensive review of the electoral process itself, the evolving role of political parties, the engagement and disengagement of the youth, gender as a key factor electoral issue, and the capacity of civil society to uphold democratic accountability. Now, one of the most striking findings of this research is, of course, was then, and I think it's even more so than as it was then, influence of Uganda's youth in shaping the country's political future. With young people comprising the majority of the population, their shifting political allegiances, whether through active engagement or whether through active disengagement, have profound implications for governance and democratic development overall. The book also provides valuable insights into voter behavior, internal party structures, weak internal party structures, and the Electoral Commission and the need for reforms. It offers lessons that are critical for strengthening Uganda's democratic institutions overall. With the backdrop of the COVID-19, which seems a long time ago, the book provides an added further complexity to what the 2021 elections were, affecting civic participation, affecting campaign strategies, affecting the overall electoral management as it was then. The pandemic exposed existing governance challenges, while at the same time, it also exposed new ones, reinforcing the urgency of building resilient democratic institutions that can withstand those types of crises. At the Julius Nyerere Leadership Centre, we remain committed to fostering critical discourse on governance, democracy, and leadership in Uganda and across the region. Our East African Fellowship Program, in collaboration with partners in Tanzania and the East African community itself, is an intentional effort to train and nurture the next generation of transformative leaders. This book reflects our dedication to evidence-based research and policy engagement, which are pillars that are essential to strengthening democracy and leadership on the continent. We extend our deepest appreciation to our research partners. It's been a long journey. Professor Sabiti Makara, Associate Professor Sarah Sully, Professor Julius Kiza, Dr. Frederick Goloba Mutebi, Dr. Anne Mugunga, Ms. Irene Ekumu, Dr. Badru Bukenya, and Mr. Ishban Kwesiga for their unwavering commitment to this project. Because, as I said, it started in 2021, and we are now in 2025. Your patience throughout the publication process has been invaluable. To the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Uganda and South Sudan, we are profoundly grateful for their steadfast support in bringing this book and this work to fruition. I have to make particular mention here that they were the only ones who would listen to our concept note in 2021 when we were proposing that we'd like to write about elections. Everybody else was saying, well, why don't we wait a little bit? Why don't we see what happens? But the minute we walked into the doors of CAS, they said, yeah, sure. What do you need? Who's going to be able to contribute to it? And for that, we're eternally grateful. I encourage all of us to engage deeply with this book, not just as a scholarly resource, but as a catalyst for meaningful dialogue and action. I hope that when you listen to it and when you read it, it will inspire critical reflections on Uganda's democratic future and maybe contribute to a more inclusive and participatory political landscape. I thank you all for being here, and I'd like to invite Anna Riesman to come up and make her remarks. Thank you.
Honorable Minister Mao, Honorable Winnie Kiza, dear Dr. Mwanga, dear Susie, dear ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to make these opening remarks in a very personal manner. And allow me to take you back into the year 2020 and the beginning of the year 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic, and indeed it seems like it was a long time ago, had disrupted our lives like nothing that we had known before. I remember myself being stuck with my family in a small 2-room apartment in Berlin for months, and really not knowing whether I would still be able to move to Uganda, as my luggage was already here, and to take over from my predecessor. Finally, instead of May 1st, we could board one of the first flights after the reopening of the Entebbe airport and arrive here in Kampala at the beginning of October. What followed in the subsequent months was an immediate dive into the deep end. I arrived here during the hottest phase of the electoral campaign. I remember sitting with Nicolas Opio in November 2020, and we were on a phone call with a colleague in Germany. And the colleague asked us, so how is the situation on the ground? And I remember Nicolas responding, we are in a war zone. And then I vividly remember what happened to Nicolas in the late December 2020. And I'm sure our keynote speaker today is also Honorable Winnie Kiza, equally remember very well these days in December. because they were the ones to visit Nicholas in prison. I also remember sitting on the balcony of the CAS with Awel Uhinganye. Awel, where are you? I don't, yes. Back then, Awel was wearing a few hats, and I know how we were discussing the fake Facebook accounts affair. Back then, Awel was a director of GCIC. And at the same time as we were talking about this affair, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation was working with the GCIC on a project called Uchaguzi, an application and a website that should allow everyone a simple access to information around the election. And so I was thinking to myself and asking Awel, how do I explain it now to the headquarters? What is going on within the GCIC and our corporation? It was a real concern. Then, of course, the internet shutdown followed. And again, I was partly thinking to myself, all the investment into this application for nothing. Because all of a sudden, in the moment that when it was supposed to be used by the voters, nobody had access. Those days were really very intense. And when on January 14th, together with our program manager, Bernard Mukona, we left our homes and spent the entire day driving through Kampala, visiting different places, we also came to Makerere. That was my very first visit to the university. It was pretty much a ghost campus, as it was a ghost city with roadblocks, barricaded shops, and hardly a soul in the streets. When later, the then EU ambassador described the election day as peaceful, I could not agree. It was calm, yes, but not peaceful. An exodus out of Kampala just happened a few days before. Anxiety was felt in the air. And until the end of February, our partners would avoid meeting with me, saying it was not a good and a right time to meet with Western organizations. It was exactly then when Dr. Susie reached out to us, suggesting this project and the work on the book that we are launching today. I immediately agreed to take on this project because I strongly believe that we needed to capture that moment, the events around the elections 2021, and that we had to analyze them from different perspectives. I am extremely grateful to all the authors who have contributed to this publication, who dared to come together and take on this important work of reviewing the form and substance of the 2021 election. With this book, we are contributing to a body of knowledge on Ugandan elections, discussing their uniqueness, but also allowing for comparative analysis with other elections worldwide. Some of the authors critically question to which extent the mere holding of regular elections, despite failures in form and substance, is sufficient to legitimize the winners and the political system as democratic. As the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, we are committed to our mission, shaping democracy together. And we thank the Julius Nyerere Leadership Centre for the cooperation on this book. I am personally very, very grateful for the restless personal commitment of Dr. Susie to the success of this project. We hope that this book will be an interesting, insightful, and valuable resource for any interested citizen of this country, be it in their professional or individual capacity. Again, I'd like to thank all the authors for their interest and willingness to contribute to this book. And I'd like to thank all of you who are here today with us as we are launching the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Susie and Anna, for those remarks and also taking us through the history of this project. And I remember at that time when we were discussing it with Susie, we first of all were asking who can convene such a discussion. All the players were labeled, others wanted to keep quiet. Then when we discussed Julius Nyerere, we said, well, Julius Nyerere, you still have, or you have some weight. You can enter the discussion and lead this process. It was not very easy. But I think I want to thank Anna and Dr. Susie for capturing that time, and also our authors for agreeing to take it up. Also, Julius Nyerere for taking the risk when everybody wanted to keep quiet. Sometimes it was better to just wait and see. But here we are, and we are launching a publication which has made a contribution and will continue making the contribution to our increasing democracy. At this juncture, I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, who is none other than Honorable Norbert Mao. He's also the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. I'm sure there are so many things he can talk about, even at the moment. But Honorable Mao, kindly take to the podium and give your keynote on this afternoon when we are launching this publication, reviewing the form and the substance of the 2021 general elections. Honorable Minister.
The country representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the Honorable Winnie Kiza, from the leadership team, as they call it, of the Alliance for National Transformation, the only party which does not like our titles, presidents and so on. The academics and researchers who spearheaded this project, stakeholders, I think I should say stakeholders, because I think I'm going to get a beating. So you are really stakeholders. Dear friends, let me congratulate Susie and the entire team for this monumental work. I intend to read it in detail. I skimmed through it in soft copy. It's not easy to read on a mobile phone. There is, of course, AI. You can select text and talks to you, but that would take a long time. What you have done through this is similar to what the musicians did in response to the hunger in Ethiopia, the Band Aid. And they composed the song, We Are the World. Because all of you are from diverse perspectives. Some are to the left, some are to the right, some are to the center, I believe. I read the conclusions, and I do not know why you were extremely cautious. Let me read page 36. I thought you were going to give it to us. You say, It remains difficult to say whether the 2021 elections contribute to the furtherance of democratization in Uganda. I think that is a curtain raiser to the next research, to the next book. Then you say, we cannot tell if policymakers and the EC learned any useful lessons for governance of elections in a health crisis. Of course, the last sentence is my homework as the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. For future elections to be more transparent, credible, free, and fair, there will be a need to adopt more electoral reforms and for the EC to take more proactive measures in ensuring that security forces follow certain established electoral guidelines. Now, for a book which is trying to draw a line between form and substance, I found this conclusion problematic. In any case, our problem really are not the laws. There is something which we have to talk about, our political culture. In one sentence, it is really the culture of the winner take all. We are here in the university where even academic freedom is under threat. I understand a curriculum for postgraduate studies in human rights was not approved by the Senate because apparently it would offend the government to teach this issue of human rights. So this is a tribute to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung that they have come to an institution which is supposed to embody freedom, which apparently is now embracing some kind of illiberal democracy. I say this as a lawyer. I say this as one who was taught for 3 years at the Faculty of Law, as it was then called. So, why should we focus on the form as the main recommendation? I can tell you as I talk now, there are things which concern me, and let me share them with you. Form and substance is explainable in terms of what the content of a free and fair election should be. Just like water is 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen. That is the essence of water. You can have it as ice when it is frozen. You can have it as gas when it evaporates. You can also have it as a liquid, the water that is there in front of us for drinking. I believe that the substance of what a free and fair election is captured in the research. You talk about the players. Look at elections as the World Cup or the Premier League, which we love for those who watch British football, or the Bundesliga for those from Germany, and Serie A for Italians, and so on. La Liga for the Spanish. A football league has got players. Call them the teams. The parallel in an election are the political parties. And I hope there will be an open discussion about the state of our political parties. I lead one. The Honorable Winnie Kiza leads another one. I'm sure there are many of you who belong to political parties. The former guild president and the current guild president, they wore red berets on campus in order to persuade voters that they are connected to a very powerful organization which is about to take power. Others belong to our grand old party, the DP. Others belong to the ruling party, the NRM. So we will also look at the state of the players of this tournament we call election. Then we look at the rules. Rules are important. When I say the problem is not necessarily the laws, the rider should be that laws should be enforced impartially for them to be meaningful. You have been listening to comments about the ruling of the Supreme Court. It's really a storm in a teacup. What the Supreme Court did is what the linesman does by raising a flag and saying, hey, the ball is crossed the line. And he keeps the flag up until the referee blows the whistle. The Supreme Court did not make the Constitution. The Supreme Court did not enact the UPDF Act. All they have told us is that there's need for alignment. There's need for will alignment. And some kind of reform if the government policy is to continue trying civilians in the military court. Some kind of will balancing. But people are making a big fuss out of it. The court actually has given us homework. And it is our duty to respect what they have decided. We also have a right to criticize. For those who want to criticize the Supreme Court ruling, you actually have a right to disagree with it, but there is no right to disrespect it or to disobey it without undermining the Constitution of Uganda. So, FIFA is in charge of the World Cup. You have the rules, and they must be enforced. Fortunately, you now have also VAR in case there is human bias. Among the laws that I worked on first when I became Minister of Justice is a law to make compulsory electronic voting. I believed that I would at least solve one problem, namely ballot stuffing, which is common. I thought that if we have electronic voting, and the technical people at the ministry agree with me, we must ensure that the ballots counted tally with the record in the machine. We even proposed in the law that any presiding officer at whose polling station the votes counted from the ballot box are more than the record on the machine, that presiding officer would go to jail for up to 5 years. So, based on my experience, because I have also been a victim of that, I took the law. My law has not yet seen the light of day. So I hope you'll allow me to mobilize you to join me in calling for making electronic voting compulsory, the way it is in India. And those machines are machines that don't have any connectivity. They have no capacity to communicate with any other machine. So those who are saying that Russians are going to rig elections using the machines, or hackers are going to hack into the machine, that capability will not exist. So the law has been referred to a cabinet committee to study it. It's now more than 6 months. I expect that those of you who really want free and fair elections will join this crusade that I'm leading to demand electronic voting, because it will at least solve one problem. The other thing I proposed was body cameras, that a presiding officer should have a body camera that records everything that is going on in the surrounding. These are proposals. So we have got the rules, but those who are supposed to enforce them may not have the capability of enforcing the rules. The Electoral Commission must be in charge of elections. And I mean everything about the election. Yesterday, Parliament almost ate the government alive over the chaos in the voter registry matter. I know for sure, for instance, that one of our party officials in Busia went and checked his name. He found he was in a polling station where he's supposed to be. A few days later, he went to check again, and he had moved without his consent. And then hundreds of voters had been shifted to another polling station. That means to have free and fair elections, you need vigilant citizens. Don't count only on the Electoral Commission. Don't count only on the government. The elections are about the people. So the vigilance of the people is what will ensure that there is real substance. I have been a candidate. I've also been a manager of a campaign. When a candidate is campaigning, they are allowed to do everything that is lawful in order to win. As a manager for presidential candidate Amama Mbabazi in 2016, one of the ways in which we thought we could ensure that we have proper records was to invest in phones. So our candidate bought thousands and thousands of phones from China. The phones were called Techno Y2. They had internet capability with cameras. They were smartphones, really basic smartphones. And the entire data of the Electoral Commission was entered into those phones. So if you open the phone, it will tell you how many polling stations are in a sub-county. And it has even a space for typing results. It even has a capability of inserting a photo of an incident which should be recorded for purposes of our records. And we had a location where there was a huge server with the capability to receive and process all that data, with massive printers to print all those things. What we didn't know is that we were plugging our hopes on a socket, but somebody else had control of the main switch. Obviously, within this room, we can think we can switch on and switch off lights. But if somebody else has control over the main switch and they don't care about our interests, then these switches and sockets are really irrelevant. So very early the next morning on election day, the main switch was turned off. All the SIM cards were blocked by MTN. End of story. We now gave ourselves the phones to use as normal phones. Now, that is impunity. First and foremost, when I buy a SIM card from you, I have a contract. It means I must communicate to whoever I want using your SIM card. The fact that you can do that and get away with it simply means that there is a lawlessness. So now that is a practical experience I am telling you about. In addition, we witness cases of violence, rigging. Understand, in one polling station, a well-known bishop went to vote and he was told that, "Bishop, you didn't have to come. We have already represented you. We have voted for you." Bribery, that one you have seen. Now, this bribery is not really confined to the NRM. This bribery is across the board. I don't bribe voters. At least I have never bribed voters. But this bribery is across the board. Now, during campaigns, there are agents of voters. I got this story from Lira, that an agent will come to a candidate and say, "In this village, I can organize 1,000 people for you to address. But make sure that you have 2,000 shillings for everybody. And then for me, the agent, at least I need 50,000 for my labor." As I campaigned for the presidency in 2021, I passed via Rubanda. And there was a long line of people, and I wondered what was going on. Then I was told that they were receiving cash. Now, that raises the other issue that you talked about, namely the teams, the political parties. The truth is, even the parties that claim to be parties for foot soldiers, parties for the masses, that is hogwash. Take it from me. All our parties are really elite parties. And the sooner we accept that, the more humility we shall have. We can be elites, but we can represent the interests of the masses. Now, the fact that people can line up, and the same people know that actually they own the cash boxes in the Bank of Uganda. The same people know that actually they own all the oil. The same people know that they own all the minerals in Uganda. And their interest would be to remove from office those who are not enabling them to benefit. So the paradox of our elections is, why do the poor vote against their own interests? Why do the poor sabotage their own interests? I've been reading a book called Elite Parties, Poor Voters. Of course, the candidates then assume the role of the government, and they provide ambulances. So that ambulance will be crisscrossing. They will repair boreholes. Yet there may be enough money in the budget actually to take piped water. They will participate in funerals. There is one MP in whose constituency it is well known that any woman who delivers a baby is entitled to soap, is entitled to a towel, is entitled to bed sheets, and those kind of things. And then the things that you go with to hospital, ranging from gauze to bandages to razor blades and so on. Now, because the poor are really the poor, and you know what I'm talking about, this appears to be such a big deal. They therefore settle for the tokens, and then we, the privileged elites, we of course guarantee our interests. So we remove taxes on tourism vehicles. So tomorrow I can import Land Cruisers for my tour company. I can have free solar panels for my hotel and apartment. The poor cannot afford milk coolers. So having won election, then I go to parliament and remove the taxes. Of course, the poor sometimes fight back, like they fought against the OTT tax, which the parliamentarians who get money for airtime and get money for internet. I get my iPad supplied by the parliament, loaded with data regularly. But I can sit in parliament and with a maximum insensitivity, pass a tax, OTT, for everybody to pay. So as I address you today, I want us to talk about the basics. We can have all the beautiful laws in the world. By the way, we have the best anti-corruption law. I've never heard anybody saying we need to reform the anti-corruption law to fight corruption. How come? Because you know that the law is not the answer. We have got one of the strongest anti-torture laws. So I insist that as we discuss this band-aid here, this version of We Are the World, which I would substitute with We Are the People, it is in our best interest to talk about a new culture. I have some recommendations, then I stop. Number one, we must renew our commitment to democracy. It's a very general statement, but there's no better way for me to say it. And being committed to democracy means you must be like Kenneth Kaunda. When Kenneth Kaunda lost elections, some of the great leaders of Africa chided him. They told him, how can you lose an election you have organized? Probably the ANT president would be another person because he organized an election for his party and he lost it. So we could say General Muntu is one of the people most committed to democracy, even if it is at his expense. Now, democracy can come at your expense, but it requires when you have measured the stakes. President Moi, as the wave of reform started in Kenya, stepped aside from the contest. I doubt whether in 2002 the opposition would have won if President Moi was on the ballot. I very much doubt it. So my number one recommendation is that the so-called trade-off between democracy and development is a false trade-off. You know, there's a man called Sakwa. He was a very strong UPC. He joined the National Resistance Movement and then he was appointed RDC. I'm telling you this story because there was a conversation between Kasirye Gwanga, one of the generals, and Sakwa. We used to have a radio program somewhere in industrial area hosted by Radio 1. So we all used to go there to express our dreams for our country in very colorful language. So one day, General Kasirye Gwanga was there, and after the show, he sat smoking. He was petting his dog. So Sakwa, who had made a very fiery submission during the talk show, it was called Kimeza, was passing. So General Kasirye Gwanga summoned him. Young man, come here. I heard you talking a lot that you want democracy, you need change and you need freedom. Let me tell you, you don't need democracy, you need food. Of course, he was very skinny. It was obvious that food would help. So, in that reality, it is then easier to give tokens than to invest in substantive reforms. My second recommendation now will involve our partner. Anna knows what I'm going to say because I never get tired of repeating it. You know that Europe, and with the support of the United States, had to invest in democratization in the former Soviet states and the Balkans, as they were called. And many of those states democratized. There may be reversals, but they democratized because of the investment which they put there. So my second recommendation is really a challenge to our partners to also invest in the substance of democracy in Africa. Because I think they are also investing in the form of democracy in Africa. Then we shall have a Poland and maybe some of the comparable countries in Eastern Europe. The DGF was a program which had a lot of potential. Through the DGF, political parties were supported for the first time to have technical people leading the parties. Right now, I'm the president of the party, I have a secretary general, we are politicians. We are really not managers of anything administrative. I don't know whether there's any political party that has got that technical arm which is really, really technical. Even the NRM, it is the election losers that you hear. They are director of this, director of that. I would wish that I wish I could afford Susie to be a policy advisor for DP. But CAS won't pay for Susie. Imagine if Susie was my policy advisor. However stupid and totalitarian I may be, she may put some sense of shame in me. So we need that for real. That DGF worked well. You know what happened. But today, let me tell you the truth. The government said at one point that we don't know what the DGF is doing. But you want to know the truth? In the very agreement with the government, the office of the Attorney General is actually supposed to sit in the apex decision-making body of DGF. The government simply decided to be absent. I don't know whether the president knows that very well, because all these things, you hear us blaming, we blame contractors. We say a contractor is not doing a project in line with the specifications, but a government watchdog is supposed to be there. Unless the watchdog is asleep or the watchdog has become a lapdog, then things can go wrong. Now, that is the story of DGF. I'm telling it to you for the first time. I think DGF never got a fair trial, because the right question would have been, where have our representatives been? Because if indeed DGF was supporting enemies of the state, if DGF was supporting programs that undermine the interests of Uganda, a Uganda government official was supposed to be there to read every word of whatever project and say, it is the interest of the Ugandan state that this project should not be funded. And of course, as a government, you have a veto. Every government has a veto, because God gave every people their own piece of earth. Of course, others are more aggressive, like the Chinese, the North Koreans. For them, they just say, stay out. We don't want you, which is not the Uganda government way. So I would advocate for another attempt at another basket fund to support the institutions that are involved in our democracy. And because of that, we now don't have many real political parties. My third recommendation is that the protest parties should be helped to transition to becoming real political parties. Because most of the parties, in my opinion, even the FDC, I would call it a protest party, really. The NUP, I would call it a protest party. They are defined more by what they oppose than by what they stand for. Stop anybody with a red beret and give them an interview of their, what you would call their catechism. You may have a problem. So, the other thing is that we must go to the rural areas. I think our sermons of democracy are concentrated in the cities. Professor Ndebesa, I want to hear you in my village. But you are rotating here in Kampala. You are great. I want to see you. I want to see you in my village. So, the rural areas are the ones who are the victims of that paradox I've told you about. So, the villagers are told only one thing. Only President Museveni can manage this country. That is the message. And it is a very strong message, by the way. And it sells. Do you want what happened in Goma to happen here? You need a muscular leader, No nonsense. Somebody who will draw the line, and if you cross it, you fall back, but without your head. So, the villagers throw away their political rights, which they can exercise during an election, in exchange for a strong man with goodies. This narrative is wrong, but it is extremely selling. I have my homework here. Let me also give you mine. Is there real support for democracy in our country? Look at our parliament. If democracy is about a majority, and to me, that's the wrong approach, because really we need some kind of consensus amidst all the democracy. I hope the academics can comment on that. Where there is strong disagreement, there should be some measure of compromise. My second question is, what kind of democracy? The Democratic Party has been advocating for proportional representation since the 1960s. We tabled a proposal to the President of Uganda during a meeting of the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue. He said it should be studied. If we had proportional representation, NUP would have many MPs outside Buganda, because most of the NUP votes were actually wasted because of the first past, the post-electoral system. And the NRM would actually have additional MPs, many from Buganda. How does proportional representation work? First of all, say in Uganda, it would give us the dividend of reducing the size of parliament, which, as you know, is now about 260 something. If you include us, the ones of Kameme, those who don't have constituency. Then you are going to have one MP representing 150,000 citizens. That means for a population of 45 million, the maximum number of parliamentarians you will have is 300. Kampala, assuming it has 3 million people, that means you are going to have 20 members of parliament. But right now, you look at a constituency in Kalangala with a handful of 1,000 people, they have an MP. Nakawa, hundreds of thousands. One MP for the East, one MP for the West. Now, in an election, each party would then generate a list. My recommendation for purposes of local content would be that we don't need to have a national list for the political parties. You can have electoral areas. So Kampala would be an electoral area, and if we require 20 MPs, each party would then file with the Electoral Commission a list of maybe 22, just for the sake of any eventuality. Or as many as they want anyway. Then people don't vote for the individual candidate. They vote for the party. Then the parties would be allocated the seats. And those who are on the list, for instance, if a party wins 20%, then they will take the 5 members of parliament. If they win 50%, they will take 10 members of parliament. Those campaigns will not be very expensive, and we will get people of substance. But now, I don't think Professor Ndebesa can join the Kawempe North race. Probably he's going to insult the voters by telling them the truth, or he will tell us the truth and we think he's insulting us. And then, but in this system, he would be a hot cake. We would all be bidding for him to be on our list. We would look for him and say, Professor Ndebesa, we beg you. You know, DP is a historical party and so on. It is a place where you belong naturally. And ANT would also be talking to him and so on. Finally, one party will win him and he will be in the top of the list. You are going to increase the quality of parliamentarians. Right now, it's a kind of beauty contest. I can perform my comedy, and I go to Parliament on that account alone. How do you balance then populations? You create a Senate where every sub-region would have 2 members, whatever, whether you call it a Senate. In the last constitutional proposal, we had something called National Council of State. It was rejected. So Sebei, small as it is, would have the same number of members of that upper house like Buganda, Rwenzori, West Nile, Karamoja, and so on, to create a sense of balance. And I think some of the laws that are proposed and passed by a kind of Kirashia-like parliament would really be filtered in the Senate. You have seen the Trump nomination processes, the vetting of the leaders. They are Republicans, but they really take you through the grill, because the country will be there after Trump. You will remain a Republican, but Trump will not be in the White House. So you want to be seen to be doing your duty. If we had proportional representation, I have done the math. UPM of President Museveni would have had 5 members of parliament in 1980. And probably UPM and DP would have formed a coalition to narrowly lead Uganda, since all of them were not very happy with Dr. Obote. My last question is, how do we stop the silencing of citizens? This debate requires citizens to talk. After all, an election gives you a seat at the table of decision making. But you must have a voice. To have a voice, you must have some content. Now, if that content is if that content is missing, then you end up with the kind of members of parliament who are simply part of the furniture of parliament. They are one of the physical features of the chamber because they don't have a voice. Now comes the last one. Will that voice be listened to? For a voice to be listened to, there must be organization behind it. So I am hoping that there should be a movement behind these ideas. Because without a movement, and the movement must not be about me becoming president, me becoming an MP, it should simply be a movement for something good for our country. That is why the Gen Zs of Kenya achieved something. Because there was nobody who was saying, I'm going to reap the benefits of these protests. But the protests were about saying, no, balance the boat. You can't put all this money, office of the first lady, office of the first daughter, office of the president, and this and this. Ruto had to cut down on a lot of things, and there was no beneficiary. But here in Uganda, tomorrow, if citizens are on the streets, and Norbert Mao will want to position himself at the head of that crowd so that he benefits. I do not know how we are going to balance that, but the struggle for free and fair elections requires a movement. And that means it cannot be championed by one political party. Fortunately, and this is the best news, the NRM also in their primaries have finally realized that, you know what? Some of these things are bad. People with money. You have civil servants who are stealing money from government. They go and buy the primary election. And they throw away members of parliament. There are people who are positioning themselves to go and defeat incumbent MPs. These people are our civil servants, senior civil servants, who are having a lot of resources. They send emissaries. So if Norbert Mao is a commissioner in a ministry, then he will send Honorable Winnie Kiza. And then Honorable Winnie Kiza will say, I have brought 10 million shillings for you for this church. And they clap. Say, by the way, also your son, Norbert Mao, has not forgotten you. He sends 50 million. Now, that money is falling like cluster bombs, and it is terrorizing our incumbent members of parliament who can no longer concentrate on their work because they know somebody is out there ready to uproot them. So, for instance, did anybody have a chance against Kateshumba, really, from URA? Nobody had a chance. Because in the primaries alone, he's capable of spending a lot of money. So, these are the things we have got to talk about, and that's why I said we must not silence people to talk about this. Your ideas may be criticized, it may be rejected, it may be rubbished, but if you believe in them, you must insist that they are the correct thing. I want to insist that Ugandans want democracy, but they have to debate what kind of democracy so that the outcome is not only about elections. It is also about defining some common ground. And right now, because of the primaries in NRM, the debate about internal democracy is taking shape. NRM actually envies some of the parties. I mean, NUP, you saw how they selected their candidate for Kawempe North. I do not know how they did it. Maybe they have some oracle that they consult inside the room, and then they come, and I think they do it like the election of the Pope. So the party has its cardinals, and the cardinals go into conclave, then the white smoke comes. Now imagine the chaos if every registered member of NUP was supposed to vote for a candidate. It will become chaotic. Actually, many of us in the opposition, we adulterate the NRM primaries. We also participate. Sometimes we participate to support a weaker candidate who we can defeat. I now have to confess these things. But that is because the institutions are still weak. I want to end here by thanking you again and for giving me a chance to express my thoughts. I am sure you invited me here as Minister of Justice, so you don't have to worry about whether these views represent the Minister of Justice or Norbert Mao. These views are for the Minister of Justice who is suffering, grappling with these problems, because I'm one of those who will be taken to a very hot place in hell if I fail to do these things, because I have the opportunity. God bless you.
I think another round for the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Thank you very much, Honorable Norbert Mao, for that wonderful keynote. He has spoken as the Minister of Justice, and he's not hiding it. He has also spoken as a politician. He has also spoken as a party leader. And he has really handled the title of this publication, the form and the substance. To what extent do we go to discuss the substance? Or is the form, discussing the form, easier? That many times we discuss the form and not the substance. And he says the laws are there. In many of the election petitions in court, there are very few judgments that point out the weaknesses of the law. When MPs go out contest elections, they all agree, the judges agree that the laws are there and they are not followed. And he has also given us some food for thought in terms of furthering our democracy. Ending with what he's taking up and a prayer to join him, to save him the hell of having the opportunity and not doing something about it. But I think in democracy, sometimes you do all you can. You may not have the results, but you lay the ground for the substance and not the form. Thank you very much, Honorable Norbert Mao. And we thank you very much indeed. At this moment, we must go into the publication. And we are going to have some panel two panels which are going to take us through the arguments that are in the publication. I'm sure we have all had the book, but we have not read it, but the authors are here with us. And I want to take this opportunity to invite the first panel, Professor Saviti Makara. How I wish if this professor went into Kawempe now, he may be given a run. Professor, please come to the podium. With all his knowledge, he can go to Kawempe and people wonder whether he's really a professor. But thank you very much, Professor Saviti Makara. He has written widely about these issues and is one of our authors. Our next panelist is Professor Julius Kiza. Professor Kiza is also very outspoken. I wish he's now quiet. And Honorable Mao challenges you to contribute to reforming the system so we can have some of you help our political system. Then thirdly, we are going to have Mr. Eshban Kwesiga. Eshban is also one of our authors. And he has also some arguments in the book. So I think we shall have the first panel. Thereafter, we shall go into the second panel. And like the minister said, we should not silence, we should debate these issues. I will start with Professor Makara, who has written the first chapter in the book, reviewing the elections. Professor Makara, what is the argument in your paper regarding the theme and also the issues you really take on? Maybe as the first question, you just help us pick the argument in your paper.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Kasacha is also a seasoned man on these issues. And his question is very broad, so it gives me all the leverage to talk about what I want. The main constraint could be time, but I think he will manage. First, the 2021 elections was quite unique because, first of all, even to assemble the people to say, you come and do research, where do you find them? Everyone was at his home, was not allowed to walk around the village to ask them to bring their views. So this was really a very challenging research for us to do because you wouldn't go anywhere to ask anybody anything. So that was quite unique in a very difficult circumstance. But it also gave us a food for thought. The food for thought was, can there be elections in a health challenging circumstance? I think in Ethiopia, they just postponed elections for some time. But here, there were two things really, or three things that happened. One, the Electoral Commission made several trips, meet the president, say you must have an election. Ordinarily, the Constitution says and the electoral laws say these are not supposed to be consulting anybody. The Electoral Commission people are not supposed to consult anybody, but I think, and I know, that the Electoral Commission made several trips to meet the president about, one, whether the election should take place, two, how they could be funded, three, how the election itself could take place. You can imagine that. So there were challenges of meeting the president who is going to be a candidate. The Electoral Commission is meeting the candidate in several times. But of course, they would say they had to meet him because he's the president. And two, Minister of Finance was dilly-dallying in terms of giving them the money. But also, the Minister of Health did not know what to do. what would we do in the health emergency? This is a very serious challenge because the Electoral Commission did not know how to go about elections whereby people are in their houses and are not allowed to go and meet. So now they come up with new laws which were not written. One, political parties must not meet anybody more than any group which is more than 200 people. In our circumstances where really elections are about making big rallies, and then the people start saying, that one is the one who has many people. It wasn't possible even for the president to do that. But the president had another layer because he's the president. So he could meet sometimes larger numbers than other parties. Then there came a problem of, or a challenge of communication. They said, if a political party should campaign through public digital means, that is, say, you put a big screen somewhere, and a few people assemble, and they look at the big screen. First of all, it didn't work. The cost of having screens around the country was not manageable at all. But also it became complicated because the candidates who are vying, especially for the first time, had a big challenge. You have to collect signatures, at least in 2/3 of the districts in the whole country, in order for you to stand as presidential candidate. Now, the challenge became so big. How do you go about now getting in contact with this one, that one, sign for you? And then you have a backing of so many people, I think 100 signatures per district. How do you get them? So those were some of the challenges for this election. Then there were people who were breaking the laws, especially from the ruling party. Let us say it bluntly. They hold parties, they have a following and so on. And they are ministers. But during the COVID, they have mammoth rallies, the people are following them up and so on and so on. And nobody is going to touch them because they are untouchable. Then there was another challenge. Primaries. How do you hold primaries in that kind of situation? That was the surface of it. That was quite challenging. Let us go to the argument. The argument for any election is that whenever you are holding an election, there are lessons to learn. So if you learn from this election, the next election you will do better. If you learn from the other election, the next one should be better. The challenge for us as the students of politics is, do elections, for example, broadly speaking, even without sticking to the 2021 election, really lead to better elections next time? We have observed over a long time that really, in many cases, you don't see people learning any new lesson from the previous election. Let me give you an example. One, the civil society and the opposition parties have been bringing reforms to Parliament for improving for increasing the free and fair state of election. Those reforms since 2009 have not seen the light of the day. The minister told us that some of the things he has proposed even now, nobody is touching them, take them to cabinet and eventually take them to Parliament. So if we are not accepting reforms, what kind of elections are you going to have? We continue doing the same thing year after the year. In 2016, when they brought a raft of reform, Parliament chose only one reform, to rename the Electoral Commission the Independent Electoral Commission of Uganda. The other reforms were debunked, were just put. Even now, many of the reforms are lying somewhere. I don't know where they are. I don't know whether the honorable minister will really struggle, because when he was given a ministerial post in his docket, he said, I'm going to make reforms. I'm not backbiting you, are here. You said you are going to make reforms. Some of you who were here as when you were a student, we know you are a man of your word. Let us get it from you now. Are we going to have reforms, or we are not going to have reforms?
Before.
Sorry? Not now. No, okay. I'm just teasing the point.
Okay.
The second thing is that we should look at our history. Our history has been bedeviled by chaos, violence, loss of lives for the sake of democracy. The point I want to tease here is, have elections led to better governance of the country? Because when you have smooth elections, you are avoiding many, many things that would have gone wrong. 5 years down the road from 1980, bloodshed was, I should say, blood was shed for democracy. Where are we? Are we waiting for another round of bloodshed take place so that, I don't know what. But ordinarily, elections should be helping us. One thing I want to point out here is that our elections have been very turbulent, violent, and really repressing people. If you go to our villages, people will not talk in small tongues so that you don't hear what they are saying. So if you have a society which is keeping quiet because they are fearing the state, you have a very big problem at your hand. You will wake up one morning and people have risen against you. Or you have put a ballot box there and people have refused to put there their ballot because they don't trust the election. Or you will have a situation whereby the unexpected takes place. You expect that you are going to win because you are such a powerful politician. And you go to the ballot box and you don't find any votes. Last election which I'm talking about, in some places that one happened. Where some parties expected to win, they didn't win because people kept quiet. They didn't say, now we are with you, we are against you. You wake up the ballot box, you find a party, why? Has swept the votes, and you say, what happened to me? So be watchful on these issues. My third point is that we believe strongly, as the people who believe in liberal democracy, that multi-party should be the key. 20 years under the NRM, there was no multi-party system. From 1986 to 2005, there was no multi-party system. When multi-party system was returned, everybody somehow said, let people go their parties. I think President Mao we always call him President Mao. I hope we are wishing you very well, my brother. President Mao was still a young politician, but really struggling to get up there. He has never lost the steam really to be at the front line. And we commend you for that. But the point is, we said, let us go to multi-party. But the question that comes up here is, has multi-party worked? We almost live as if we are still in the movement system. The structures of the state are embedded with the structures of some party, especially the NRM. Now, if that is the case, where is the multi-party system working? If multi-party system fails, it comes what my brother here, my young brother here, always talks about illiberal democracy. What is illiberal democracy? Illiberal democracy is where you see, actually, I think it is a Professor Oloka who uses that phrase, who says, what you see is not what you get. In this system of wars, now we have an illiberal democracy. Everybody will say there are 20 parties in Uganda. Where are they? Have you ever thought about that? 29, I think 29 or 27 now. I think 2 were deregistered. But Where are those parties? I think we have a few which are still active, which are still struggling, but the other ones, I don't know where they are. But why are they not prospering? Partly because parties which should be making democracy work, some of them are sleeping on the job. Others have lost steam. Others are working for the ruling party. So, where is the multi-party system in Uganda? This is the food for thought for us who are interested in the politics of this country. You remember there is also a part of history where there was no democracy at all or no party competition at all. Between 1962 and 1980, there was no single election. A country having 18 years without an election is a very dangerous situation. Indeed, during those days, there was turmoil. Turmoil of 1966, turmoil of 1971, turmoil of 1980, 79 when the soldiers from Tanzania overthrew Amin, and indeed even a long period of Idi Amin ruling with impunity. Do we want impunity in our country? No. We want democracy and would be happy if we have multi-party democracy working smoothly in this country, because when you contest against the other one and you do it smoothly, the next day you can hold each other in your chest and say, okay, my brother, next time, there's a next time, and you'll win. And that's why we believe in the multi-party system, because if it was working at all, that would be the best way of changing Gambia. But a situation whereby you don't believe the other one, you know, we have a hall here, it used to be called Northcote. Now I don't know, it's called in Sibirwa. Northcote, okay. It used to have a motto that you either win or you lose. I either win or you do what? Or they lose. That kind of scenario is not good for democracy, because in democracy you go there to lose or win. But I think in some countries, I think Uganda could be included in that, there's a situation where we would say there's only one option, to win. So if you have a situation where the contestant says, I can only win, that is not a good situation for multi-party democracy. I think I've taken a long time, but...
Thank you.
Linda Ko. I still have 1 point or two.
I want to bring a question. I know we have to come back. We have to come back, but because of the time, I think we can go back and forth.
Yes.
Maybe I'll just give you a question before we come to Dr. Kiza here.
Okay.
Regarding the narrow conception of the constitutional role of the Electoral Commission. In part of your book, you have argued that the Electoral Commission has had this narrow conception of a free and fair election, that they shun away from other activities that essentially affect the credibility of the elections.
Can I answer that one before Professor Chiza comes in?
Yes, please.
One of the disasters of elections in Uganda is the Electoral Commission. Disaster. Why do I call it a disaster? Because the Electoral Commission in Uganda does not believe that it can be free, independent, and impartial. Why? First of all, even as symbolically, when the Parliament renamed the EC as IEC, that nomenclature of Independent Electoral Commission of Uganda, that Electoral Commission of ours has never adopted that nomenclature. Why? Because they know they are not independent. Have you ever thought about that? They are not independent, so they cannot call themselves the Independent Electoral Commission of Uganda. Two, the Electoral Commission, like Dr. Sekaja argued before, that they look at their role in a very narrow sense. Like registration, as we are registering now, like later on confirming that they have a register. Like after that, you people come and throw in your ballots. They don't extend their mandate to the processes of elections. The processes of elections are not about registering, coming and voting. They go up to a point of making sure that everybody works by the rules. But these rules sometimes are bent by the Electoral Commission. For some people, say, for you, I'm going to be tight on you, but for some other one, there's no tightening of the rules. So I hope that this time round, possibly the Electoral Commission will do a better job, because we have been complaining about their bigger mandate, which they don't pursue.
Let me invite Dr. Kiza to come in to talk about the COVID elections. Maybe just the first question, Dr. Kiza, is that picking up from Professor Makerere, how can the Electoral Commission expand their conceptualization of the power? What, within the current legal framework, what stops them, or what do you think there would be that independent commission? How would it expand its conceptualization of its role? And then you can give us a snapshot on the COVID elections.
Okay. The independent Electoral Commission has got to be conceptualized in context. And the context is of a semi-authoritarian regime, a neo-Stalinist regime, which believes in the tradition of entitlement to govern because they liberated you. Now, for anybody to expect that these institutions created by somebody with an entitlement to rule because they liberated you, that these institutions will be democratic, is actually to expect the unrealistic. I think what we can expect is the appreciation that democracy is a process, not an event. The issue is that in what ways can we deepen the democratic space in our society, in our lifetime, hopefully. In other words, what is it that we can do to ensure that the rule of law becomes the tradition in town, that there is equality before the justice system, that the appointment of the commissioners represent a high level of standards, perhaps the level of a senior judicial officer, that we will hold them to account, perhaps by having them hold office for 5 years, perhaps no more, non-renewable, in the tradition of Greek society democracy. So the point really, in short, is that we need to appreciate that the so-called independent electoral commission is not independent because of the context, which is semi-authoritarianism. I think the more relevant question is what you and I need to do to deepen the level of independence of our institutions, not just the electoral commission. The judiciary is already demonstrating that they can assert themselves in certain spaces, provided they don't involve number one. So what are we doing in those spaces where we can expand our democratic spaces? Now, you said I should comment on the role of impact of COVID-19. Okay, I did a study on a very simple subject matter, simple but controversial, and so I didn't want to do electoral commission. These are areas of this friend of mine. He does the same study, the role of electoral commission, then he comes to tell us, though, they are still having huge gaps. So, me, I did something which is less regular in political spaces, and that's the impact of COVID-19 on the 2021 elections. I tested qualitatively 3 simple propositions. The first was that COVID-19 and the associated Stalinist measures restricted democratic spaces for all political parties. The second proposition was that the existential threat associated with COVID-19 transformed the ruling party from the proverbial hybrid regime into an accountable system of governance, because there was a threat to life. The third proposition I tested was that the scientification of elections was good for the rule of law and was also politically neutral. So the adoption of scientification I tested was actually advancing spaces for transforming Ugandan democracy into the emerging global standards of scientific election. I don't know that I should comment on the methodology. We gathered information briefly through website visits, through critical literature review, through document analysis, especially of the electoral laws, through rapid evidence analysis and key informant interviews. What are the main findings? Because I think in these kinds of things we don't say details. Allow me to summarize the finding. Finding number one is that COVID-19 and the associated Stalinist measures were necessary. They were necessary for saving lives. But whereas they were necessary, we do not see the regime treating everybody in the same way. There were differential impacts, especially at the point of imposing and observing the restriction. Whereas the regime was very kind to the opposition politicians, including Honorable Kiza and others, the regime was kind by giving them security and protecting them from crowds. The regime was very, very kind to the opposition by dispersing crowds and therefore preventing death. But when it came to the NRM crowds, the regime was not that careful. It seemed to allow them to be free and therefore subject them to the spread of COVID-19. That is the differential impact that was observable. Second, we observed that the scientification of elections is interesting. The science of the scientific elections is clear, but the politics of the scientification of elections appears intriguing. Why? The science is that we can go smart. We can have smart governance. We can have smart elections. And that is abundantly clear. But the politics is that, for one, that most of the FM stations are owned in this country by NRM-leaning heavyweights. So we are talking of crony capitalism as a space that would be made available for elections to be scientific. These spaces preferentially allocated time to NRM-leaning candidates. The internet, the idea that you can have internet and social media was also a welcome piece of scientific elections. But the point is that internet penetration rates in this country is still worrying, still low, especially in the rural areas. So we are talking of about 70% of Ugandans, Ugandan poor, both urban and rural, who were unable to access the scientific space mediated through some of these smart electoral spaces. And the idea that the regime could switch off internet also seemed to have stifled the space called scientific elections. Switch off the internet and ensure that you can't access FM, ensure that the rural voters are not able. At the same time, be kind to the opposition parties by blocking them and allow, the Minister of Health was allowed to move with the crowd in Lira to march without any protective gear, no protection whatsoever. She was watching and walking and marching with the voters to mobilize votes. And the regime was not kind to these NRM-leaning candidates. So there were differential impacts. In short, COVID-19 challenged business as usual democracy, but appears to have created spaces for the ruling elites to favor NRM-leaning candidates and disfavor the opposition politicians. I have no useful comments to add.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kiza, for summarizing what you did and what you found out. And I think I can now bring in Eshban, who chose to title his presentation, The Museveni Doctrine, and he actually shares a perspective of election violence. And maybe it could cut across some of the arguments that we are seeing if you are looking at the form and the substance. Eshban, please, this Museveni doctrine, and how did it come into our elections?
What is it? Well, I should start by explaining how I arrived at this topic. A long, long time ago, I had the idea to write a book about Museveni. And thinking about it now, it was a crazy idea because I've since abandoned it, mostly because I got distracted by the boring necessities of economic life, paying bills, etc. But back then, part of the research for that book was to read over 300 pages of Museveni's speeches from 1986 up to the early 2000s. And one of the things that emerged from reading all these speeches is that within the first 10, 15 years of the Museveni presidency, he was very direct. He was very uncensored and spoke his mind on various issues. In the later years of his presidency, and I suspect around the time we introduced multi-party democracy, Museveni starts to become a bit more self-censored, a bit more subtle, a bit more sophisticated. But if you look at the first 15 years of those speeches, and many of these speeches are available on the State House website and in a little book called What's Africa's Problem, and some other people have also tried to organize them. One of the things that comes out is that Museveni articulates what are his views on how a society should organize itself. What are his views on the role of the military in the election or politics of a country? And what are his views on how a poor agrarian country like Uganda should interact with Western liberal democratic ideas, such as democracy? In 1991, Museveni came to this very university giving a speech at the Freedom Square, where addressing students, and he said that the African intellectual and middle-class individual is completely incapable of original thought and analysis. He goes on to say that it's pathetic to see how the so-called African intellectual mimics the ideas of others, and that the fate of a lazy person is to mimic the ideas of others. And in those remarks, Museveni shows that, first of all, he sees himself as a very original thinker, and that he holds a deep, deep contempt for Africans that take on wholeheartedly liberal democratic Western values, because he says that that the fate of the lazy person is to mimic the ideas of others, and by that he means, you know, Western Europe, North American countries. Again, in 1991, which I think is the year that Honorable Mao said that he left university, Museveni, speaking at the 5th anniversary of the NRM, said that we take the politicization of the soldier with the highest importance. Now, you need to know what this means, because we talk about the military here, or if you go to civil society meetings, you'll hear many people talk about the militarization of politics, the politicization of the military, and we talk about it as though these are the crude acts of a crude individual, without realizing that as far back as 1991, Museveni was articulating why it's important to politicize the military, and that the military is a political institution and thus should be used as a political tool. In fact, in the UPDF, there's a position called the political commissar. The role of the political commissar is to concern themselves with the political education of the soldier. There are 2 other countries that have these roles. One of them is Russia, the other is China. So it starts to paint a picture of the template against which the Museveni administration has designed the interaction of the military and politics. That these are things, and I'll later on I'll mention why the first quote was important. But the second last quote I'll use here in the interest of time is, we have to remember that this is also the same individual who, while he was at the University of Dar, his university thesis was on the ideas of Frantz Fanon, who says that violence is the highest form of political organizing. So here you have an individual who sees himself as a very original thinker, someone who despises the mirroring or replication of Western liberal democratic ideas. And then you also have an individual who believes that the military should take a very active and accepted role in the politics of a nation. And you also have an individual who's flirted with the idea that violence is the highest form of organizing. And I think that many things, remember, I'm rushing through 30 years of speeches in about 2 minutes. But all these things come together to form a dangerous cocktail that I think produced itself in the 2021 elections. When I was writing this paper was really an invitation, because in writing it, it occurred to me that Museveni has an idea of how societies should organize themselves. And I think that a big part of that idea involves accepting the military as an active political institution that is involved in determining the political destiny of a country. My hope is that perhaps someday he might be brave enough to write and articulate this idea which can be seen as an alternative form of governance, or that someday he might organize his thoughts to articulate it. And in writing this paper, which I named the Museveni Doctrine, is to theorize, or my theory is that Museveni has an idea of an alternative governance system that actively involves military participation in governance. And one person, Eshban Kwesiga, can't sit up at night and theorize on what this idea with. And my invitation is to anybody here, who's interested in going down this path with me, to reach out so that collectively, like I said, one person can't arrive at what it is, that collectively we can sharpen each other and hopefully arrive at some conclusion of what the Museveni Doctrine is, which I suspect is some idea of an alternative an alternative form of governance, which, by the way, is not democracy, and I suspect it's not autocracy. It is something a bit more jumbled and more complex. My last quote on this: the reason why I think that Museveni sees himself as an intellectual with an alternative doctrine is in 1991, while addressing heads of states at a Caribbean meeting, he said, "I do not want to be a consumer of political thought. I too want to be a contributor to political thought." That's it.
Thank you very much. Eshban, I'll just ask one question, looking at this doctrine, and that Museveni has been around for 40 years now, and he has practiced that doctrine, or the military has come into our politics, and that also crosses down to violence, and some kind of adversarial nature of politics. Because right now, we seem to have that adversarial politics in our country. When Messi was coming, many of us thought we had a soldier, at least he's going to counter this soldier. Now we have NUP, we have the foot soldiers, you see the combat attire, and all that is to assure that we are ready to take these people on. Has that doctrine influenced our political and our democratization process? In your opinion, how is that doctrine affecting this substance of what we are looking at in this election process?
I think that doctrine still influences Uganda's electro-democratic journey, because in the first half of Museveni's presidency, he writes about it, and he talks about the use of violence, and taking some inspiration from Mao, not President Mao, but Mao Zedong, taking some inspiration from Mao Zedong. He talks about the use of force with dealing with alternative, individuals that have alternative thought around how society should be organized. And in the first years of his presidency, he writes this. But in the later years of his presidency, he stops to write it and starts to act on it. And we see it in the treatment of people like Kizza Besigye, people like Bobi Wine. And this is what convinces me that doctrine still influences Uganda's politics today, because today, you no longer see him write or talk about it, but you'll see those actions play out in how he interacts with his political opponents.
All right, thank you very much. I think I can open it up. Set this panel off. I'm sure that the people in the audience will have one or two comments.
Thank you so much. My name is Aloikin Praise Opoloje, and my question is directed to all the panelists. And Professor Makerere had talked about how the whole idea of citing out some of the injustices in the electoral process is to hope that this process would get better and better, the Electoral Commission would get better and better. But time has proven that it has not. And there has come an idea that myself has bought into in the past few days leading up to the next election, the whole idea that we should boycott these elections such that we can acknowledge that they have totally become useless and are not in any way going to deliver the democracy that we want. I would love to pick your thought on that. Can we continue with the system that we have in place to achieve democracy, or should we go full-fledged into a color revolution of sorts to overhaul the entire system, starting with boycotting the next election? Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good afternoon, but good evening. My name is Shivan Komhanjo SJ. I am a student here. Mine actually, it's a submission. This is a topic I usually pick interest in. And sometimes the things that happen in this country get so sentimental, and I'm puzzled. I'm thinking, I'm like, but shall we ever have a system that really works, that is free and fair, like we always talk and address and all that? But a submission I wanted to give is that the narrative that politics actually in this country, leadership is for the rich. I mean, the policies that are passed by this country affect people in the villages, in remote areas. But then these are the people that don't have the autonomy to really vote for the right people. You have an MP who owns commercial buildings in Kampala, and probably they sell their commercial building. They come, they monetize the whole political system, and what they are doing, they are bribing a voter with a bar of soap or even salt. But remember, the policies that are passed by the government majorly affect this person in the village. And so you want to think, like, really, and the reason, their major motive to even do this, it's because the whole favor, the whole luxurious that comes with the leadership people in this country, that you are an MP, but you're earning millions and millions of money that you don't even do anything for. And so there is that whole puzzling understanding that why do the poor have to be oppressed this much? That they have to be in a place where they can't even, when they have a right to really exercise it, they can't exercise it because there is a class. So it even takes you to a discussion of classism and all that. And even maybe what Professor Chiza talked about, the whole scientific election, that people, the narrative that media was involved. So you find there is a political party that has to go on a certain media to air out their desire to rule this country and all that, but the media is being owned by a ruling government, and so they are suppressed like that. And so there is a lot of confusion, a lot of annoying things.
Wow. My name is Julius Nyerere, and I'm also a student, a master's student here at Makerere University. I'm currently doing a study around elections, and my study proposes to enhance voter participation through diversifying voting options. And some of the key findings I'm finding in field is you find people as talking about they need to, Uganda needs to get other people who are contractors to come and be the ones who are leading the entire election process. And my question to the panelists, all of them, what is your standard description of a free and genuine election? And how can they happen? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We have a lady before we come to the gentleman here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Good evening. So from the panel discussion, we have concluded, or we have agreed and concluded that the system is rigged. My question is, for all these years, for the 40 years, let me say, why have we failed to rig the rigged system? And also, as we approach the 2026 elections, what alternative do we have to change the narrative? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. We had somebody right here.
My name is Sidney Sproul. I'm a strategist, just to avoid getting politicized myself. But a question, Eshban. We talk about the Museveni doctrine, and you also kind of made some sort of comments about Museveni as not just himself, but all of the apparatuses and systems that are around him. And in your study, I'm kind of curious, to what extent have you differentiated between him, the person, and the speeches that he's quote unquote written, some of which may not have been written by him later on in his life, and between all of the extended sort of systems and people that are around him, and the ways in which they might otherwise exercise discretion or simply mimic this ideology or doctrine that you're talking about. And could you perhaps lend some light in terms of how you would go about distinguishing between Museveni, the person, and the systems that are around him, and how the systems around him operate on his behalf?
Yeah, thank you so much. And the panelists and the congregation. My name is Moise Natamba. Makerere is where my journey began and it still continues. Yeah, my focus is on the youth. I hear people speak, but I have not heard anything concerning the youth. Where do we have, the next panelist, by the way, where do we have the scenario and where can we put this situation whereby the elected or the real politicians see or try to have a view of the youth being thieves or maybe being so redundant that they cannot form any future in what they are doing in this country. Then another thing, we have a scenario where we elect people or where the country suggests with its own reforms and its own politics, or where people are appointed, even behind the curtains, and are established to us for leadership. But there is a scenario where now we switch to Ugandans can't have access, even the rights of leaving their country, to go outside to participate in any work or investment. But we have a lot of people coming into our countries in the form of investors, but they are on free tax, on free food, and on free rent. Take an example of Eritreans, Sudanese, and Chinese, or other people, the so-called investors that come in our country and sit in apartments where we Ugandans can't rent. But the apartments are for ministers. When you complain, it is Uganda. You are not, it is not head of us, what? So how can the coming leaders or the opposition that has been despised by the doctrine you are talking about come up to curb that situation? Thank you.
Let's have Honorable Kiza.
Thank you so much, the moderator. I would like to thank the minister for being so candid during his keynote speech. And I would like to encourage you to take on the aspect of really making the Electoral Commission really independent. You know, in the thinking of Parliament, when they changed the name from the Electoral Commission to the Independent Electoral Commission, of course adhering to what was coming from court, was that it was going to be independent. However, what they left out was to also get it independent from being appointed by the president, who is always an actor in the elections. It would have been independent if aspects of saying like, do not bring in people from political parties, active political party actors, because the current commission has even chairpersons of political parties as commissioners. Someone is a known NRM chairman from his district, comes on board as a commissioner. Someone is known as a former candidate, is brought on board. It ceases to be an independent electoral commission because you will realize that many of the commissioners are working hard to defend their political party, which they belong. So, working together with Parliament, Honorable Minister, I would encourage you, among the reforms that you are coming with, ensure that the Electoral Commission becomes independent. Otherwise, our Gen Zs are coming up with radical decisions of saying, I think, no more elections, and you can understand what that would amount to. The other issue was the issue of the perceived liberator, who thinks everything he does is just being kind to the nation, and that we have not even paid them enough. Some people have even gone ahead to ask, how much blood did you lose so that Ugandans can donate it and give it back to you so that you let go? It reminded me of what President Museveni said when he appointed his wife as the Minister of Karamoja, that my wife has decided to go and sacrifice for the nation and go to Karamoja. I said, look, wait a minute. So all these other ministers you have been appointing for Karamoja, you hadn't put it clear that making you a minister of Karamoja was a sacrifice. Until when your wife comes in, that's when it becomes a matter of sacrifice. So it augurs in the same direction with what you said, that he wears the hat of saying, I'm your liberator, and therefore you are not supposed to touch me. And this is what the late Gaddafi was telling him, that liberators do not subject themselves to elections. I'm sure he's about to come to that. Getting back to COVID, I got the opportunity of managing the elections at the Alliance for National Transformation. And during that time, some of us thought that in the mind of the president and the regime apparatus, it looked like it was only members of the opposition that had COVID. And therefore the country, the regime, was kind to the citizens not to bring members of the opposition closer to them. Actually, it is the reverse of what you thought. That the regime was kind to the members of the opposition, that they should not mingle with the people. But in our own understanding, it looked like we had COVID and we were stopped from interacting with the community lest we spread the COVID. Because everywhere we went, we were not allowed to interact with the people. The strict adherence to the standing operating procedures of 200 people and being in a distance from where you were applied. In some instances, we were not even allowed to enter the gazetted venues where we were supposed to operate from. The radios and TVs were only at the luxury of the NRM and President Museveni. Because whether you liked it or not, all radio stations, all TVs would be hosting the president at the same time. Meaning that no other candidate would switch on a TV or radio station to listen into a different candidate. So the monopoly of the media by the ruling government also made it so hard for democracy to work for everyone. And no wonder that the recent Afrobarometer report highlighted that majority of the Ugandans really believe in democracy, but they are not satisfied with how it is supplied. The outcome of democracy, they don't see it. Because people ended up voting for people that they don't know. Others ended up voting because they had received their 1,000 shillings and they may never get what they voted for. The many promises that were made are always violated and people may not get what they thought would be given to them. And so, to me, I still believe that COVID was used as another weapon to restrict civic participation in the democracy of our country. I still want to believe that as long as we have an electoral commission that is not independent in nature, that reports to one of the participants, elections may be in futility. We still believe in democracy. We want to continue pursuing it. And like majority of you have said, we shall reach out to the population and make sure that they are civic competent. Because that is another aspect that this regime has sat on, to make sure that we don't reach out to the people. Even when it is time that we are supposed to go, you saw what happened to the new leadership. When they wanted to get out to the masses and tell them what to do, people were arrested, people were subjected to torture, and all these arrests that have led people to the court martials, all these are intended to silence alternative views so that it is only one man who remains afloat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we come back to the panelists to respond to these questions and also make their closing remarks before we move into the next panel. I'll start this time with Eshban, then we can go all the way.